Hello, seafood friends. You're listening to Catch the Current, the coolest seafood podcast out there from the team at Undercurrent, bringing you everything from the boats to the boardrooms, breaking down the news, spilling a little industry fish oil, and sharing the sharp market insights you need to know. I'm Amanda Buckle.
And I'm Lauren Casiglione. We've got a special treat for you this week. We talked to Josh Zive, the executive director of the newly formed U.S. Shrimp Coalition, about the news topic that just won't quit, and that's tariffs.
But first, some of the other big headlines to hit this week. And this one caught me off guard because just nearly a year ago, the company was talking about expansion, and now they're shutting things down. So Hudson Valley Fisheries, one of the oldest land-based aquaculture operations in North America, says it's winding down its recirculating aquaculture system, its steelhead trout operations, over the next 3 months. So the company has been operating since 2014 at a 63,000 square foot facility in Hudson, New York, with the capacity to produce between 1,000 and 1,200 metric tons of steelhead trout every year.
The company announced the decision in a statement posted to Instagram on Monday, August 3rd, saying a combination of rising operation costs, U.S. tariffs, and delays securing a dedicated water source made it impossible to scale production to a financially sustainable level. They specifically pointed to higher transportation costs because of fuel prices, more expensive electricity, and increased costs for fish stock, feed, and other production supplies due to tariffs. Link to the full story from Undercurrent reporter Jacob Resnick in the show notes.
Jacob also broke the news on Wednesday evening that U.S. wild salmon leader Silver Bay Seafoods suspended operations at its Valdez, Alaska plant more than a month early as the wild harvests continue to fall far short of forecasts. And it's also the second salmon processing plant that the Seattle, Washington-based company shut down because of the current season.
Sources told UCN that Silver Bay is still buying salmon and running them through their Seward plant. For the latest harvest figures, visit undercurrentnews.com. And in other big news, Amazon is facing a proposed class action lawsuit in the U.S. over the way it markets seafood products on its platform.
And this one's all about sustainability claims. The lawsuit alleges Amazon misled consumers by using labels like dolphin safe, responsibly sourced, sustainable, wild caught, and even Marine Stewardship Council certified sustainable seafood in ways that gave shoppers the impression that products had minimal environmental impact. The plaintiffs are arguing that those claims weren't properly substantiated and in some cases may have amounted to what's often called greenwashing. The lawsuit was filed by Higgins Berman, which claims Amazon's own environmental marketing policies require sustainability claims to be truthful and not misleading. But the complaint argues Amazon still used broad environmental messaging without enough disclosure for consumers to fully understand what those claims actually meant.
And finally, let's wrap up with some earnings news. Thai Union had a pretty strong second quarter. The seafood giant posted its highest ever gross profit margin in the second quarter of 2026, even though overall sales growth was fairly modest. Sales were up about 1.4% year on year to just over $1 billion, but the headline number was really profitability. Thai Union's gross profit margin hit a record 21.4%. The company credited that to a couple of things: lower raw material costs for both fish and shrimp, plus improvements in operational efficiency.
And tariffs actually played an interesting role here too. Earlier this year, Thailand benefited when the U.S. reduced its additional import tariff to the same 10% baseline rate applied to most other countries. Thai Union also managed to keep some of the price increases it had already passed along to U.S. customers. Now, that changed again in late July when the U.S. announced updated Section 301 tariffs. Thailand is now facing an additional 12.5% tariff compared to 10% for countries like India and Ecuador.
But despite that, Thai Union says it doesn't expect the higher tariff to significantly hurt its competitiveness. The deep financial dive from UCN EMEA Deputy Editor Dan Gibson can be found in the show notes.
Now, as promised, it's tariff time. So our guest this week joins us from a new organization called the U.S. Shrimp Coalition, which has just launched, bringing together importers, distributors, processors, retailers, and major trade associations with a shared mission, which is keeping shrimp affordable for American consumers.
Something we can all get on board with.
The coalition says it's responding to the growing number of tariffs and trade restrictions affecting imported shrimp. And while domestic shrimp harvesters have been pushing for stronger trade protections, the coalition argues that imported and domestic shrimp play complementary roles and that new tariffs ultimately lead to higher prices for consumers and disruptions throughout the supply chain. Now, leading the effort is Josh Zive, a Washington, D.C. based trade attorney and government affairs specialist who serves as the coalition's executive director. I talked with Josh earlier this week about why the coalition was formed, how it's approaching the current trade environment, and more.
Let's
Let's
take
take
a
a
listen.
listen. Thanks for joining us on Catch the Current today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, the US Shrimp Coalition just launched, but I want to actually first, before we dive into that, I want to learn a little bit more about your background. So, can you tell us a little bit
Sure.
about your experience working with the seafood industry and what led you to lead the US Shrimp Coalition?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a lawyer and advocate in Washington, D.C., where I've been for about, oh, goodness gracious, almost 25 years now. And during the course of that entire time, I've worked closely with seafood interests and seafood companies on a range of issues related to the U.S. government, to international negotiations, to trade policy. And in fact, 20 years or so ago, got very involved in issues related to anti-dumping duties that were being applied to frozen shrimp then, and working with domestic companies who had an interest in that issue. So over the course of my career, though, I've worked on many issues. One through line has been working with companies in international seafood issues.
So, you've had all this experience in the industry then 25 years down the line. If you could use three words to describe the current US trade environment for shrimp orders right now, what would they be?
Sure. I mean, I would say it is turbulent, it is complicated, and it is uncertain. At least to be fair, that might be cheating. Two of those might be synonyms for each other, but it is, I will say this, it is a uniquely turbulent time. The international seafood industry has faced issues related to tariffs, whether those are anti-dumping duties or otherwise, and have faced issues related to health and all kinds of, you name it, we've any number of issues. But I think what's unique about the current environment is they're all coming together at the same time, right? Is that we have an administration that is really seeking to use restrictions on imports in ways that no other White House has. We have a Secretary of Health and Human Services who has been willing to lean into the most extreme criticisms of imported shrimp. And we have let's say, domestic production. So just think here, the people who actually catch the shrimp, who are emboldened and active at a uniquely high level. I mean, in no small part because Louisiana is in a very powerful place in the federal government right now because we have a Speaker of the House, for example, from the state of Louisiana, and they're very well positioned to be effective at this time.
It kind of led me into my next question. I was going to say, when did the idea for this nationwide alliance first come about? But it sounds like it was kind of this culmination that kind of brought you here.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of things, but it's certainly, we've noticed over recent months just an increasing volume and intensity of what we think is real misinformation about imported shrimp. And it created a need, I think, to get a fair second part to that story out there, right? For people to understand really the role that imported shrimp plays in the US, food sector and the risks that would come with import restrictions.
You're right. It's a lot of misinformation out there. But what's the US Shrimp Coalition's, how are they going to combat that?
Well, I think, first and foremost, there's some truths on our side that people just need to understand, which is that, for example, imported shrimp is the shrimp that Americans depend on, right? Over 90% of our shrimp supply is a result of imported shrimp. And that's because that's where you get access to farmed shrimp, right? For wild caught shrimp, which is a fundamentally different product and it comes at a higher cost to obtain it. It's smaller in supply. That if Americans understood that kind of the necessary role that imported shrimp plays, I think they would view it differently because I think they would understand it's not a choice between, is the shrimp that I go to the grocery store, is it going to be U.S. shrimp or non-U.S. shrimp? That's not the choice. The choice is it going to be farmed shrimp or will it not be there at all? And that sounds extreme, but Amanda, for people of my vintage, and particularly if you grew up not near an ocean, like I, as a young person in both Nevada and Indiana, when I was young, sign of absolute, fanciness and wealth because shrimp was expensive. It was hard to get your hands on. And that was all because you didn't have frozen shrimp filling that place. And we can easily go back to that if we I was going to say freeze them out of the market, but that's a bit too cute.
No, you bring up some good points, but do you think it's the policymakers that, misunderstand, what's going on with the shrimp supply chains, or do you think that's just where we have to start?
I think it's both. It's difficult to kind of, I think, draw a bright line between cause and effect here. Does the public attitude cause the government policies, vice versa? I think there's a there's kind of a feedback loop between them, which is why the coalition's goal is to serve as a voice in both of those discussions on the public sector, facing the public and with the government.
Okay. So what is the U.S. Shrimp Coalition's highest priority then at the moment?
Well, I think let's start with step one. Our highest priority, let's do no more harm. Let's avoid putting more tariffs on imported shrimp, more import restrictions on imported shrimp. Let's start there by not making it worse. And then we can talk about, I think, some of the burdens that have been put on in recent months that we could make reasonable and potentially lift.
One group that's been very vocal throughout Trump's tariffs and the trade war has been the Southern Shrimp Alliance.
Yes.
And they argue that stronger trade enforcement is necessary because domestic shrimp are in crisis. How would you respond to that?
The companies that are the part of our coalition, and honestly, the vast amount of reputable companies out there support, reasonable and fair enforcement of trade laws when it comes to things like safety and health. Absolutely. However, what groups like SSA are really seeking is to keep entire swaths of products out of the market or to raise the cost of them so much that, it essentially would allow the luxury product to compete with them. And I just don't think that, I think it fundamentally misunderstands the market. I think, and it also does not serve the best interests of American consumers. That perhaps, if it works out as they say, would serve the interests of a relatively small number of domestic shrimpers, but the much larger population of both American consumers, restaurants, the cold storage industry, all of these other jobs that benefit and depend upon imported shrimp, that would be the cost you pay.
You mentioned the members, National Fisheries Institute is one of them.
Yes.
Can you mention any more members? How many members do you have right now? How are you growing your group?
It's rapidly evolving, so I don't want to fix to a number, but we've got a number of seafood companies that are directly involved. There's, like you said, along with the NFI, the National Retail Federation, and a number of chambers of commerce. We expect to have more information out on that soon.
Well, that about does it for us this week. But before we go, I want to share a few exciting Undercurrent updates for our UCN Pro subscribers. Undercurrent has added a global tuna price tracker to its growing suite of data products. The tracker brings together UCN's tuna pricing data in one place, including proprietary global benchmarks and Asian, European, and U.S. wholesale prices. So if you want to explore that data, we've got a link in the show notes.
Undercurrent has also launched weekly price reporting for Alaska frozen green chum salmon roe, as well as pink salmon green roe, expanding its salmon pricing coverage into one of the industry's most specialized and least transparent product categories. The new assessments tracks wholesale spot market values for frozen ocean-run chum and pink salmon green roe blocks, reflecting prevailing FOB Seattle replacement values traded between primary sellers, exporters, and wholesale buyers.
But wait, there's more, Amanda. Undercurrent has also launched an artificial intelligence research and summary tool trained on our extensive archive of proprietary seafood reporting. Ask UCN allows users to interact with UCN's exclusive content that is not available on other large language models such as ChatGPT, Claude, and Grok, and it is behind our paywall.
Well, that does it for us this week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here next week.
Bye-bye.